I think the privilege I've had is I've had the chance to mentor a lot of juniors and, work with incoming interns as well. And the one thing I always say to them is the great thing about the tech space is it's so fast moving. So there's going to be some assets you'll see us create, which are very much focused on the positive. And then there may be things like roundtables or even speaking opportunities where you have that chance to delve into a bit more detail and really delve into what was the why, like what actually happened in this case and how did you solve for it. So really between advocacy and sales, it's really a symbiotic relationship. So sales help us to get those references. We leverage your trusted relationships to build our own trusted relationships to then build those references, which then you use.
Welcome to GrowthPulse, the B2B sales podcast. You might be a salesperson. You could lead a sales team. Maybe run a business or you're a battle-tested entrepreneur. Then we built this podcast for you. Great salespeople are built, not born. We learn so much from the deals we win, but we learn even more from the deals we lose. In each episode, we bring you some of the world's leading salespeople, sales leaders, and experts in sales tech to share their best lessons from both their wins and their losses. Before we start, please check out the screen of your phone or laptop, and if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you've clicked subscribe and press that like button down below. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, click the plus sign to follow so we can let you know when we publish each new episode. If you like the episode, drop us a comment with any questions about the show. We'd love to get to know our audience. Great businesses always feature world-class salespeople, and the best salespeople are always learning. So let's jump in. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of GrowthPulse, the B2B sales podcast. Simon, mate, welcome back. Hope you've had a great week.
G'day, mate. I've had a great week and I'm really excited about today's episode.
Mate, absolutely. I didn't introduce myself, Dan Bartels. I'm one of your co-hosts here with Simon, and we've got a great former colleague of ours, Mel Cripps. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Mel, look, you and I obviously know each other well, and you're working with Simon now, but look, for everyone's benefit, you're an advocacy marketer. Give us a bit of background. You've got a huge wealth of experience in the space. How did you get into advocacy marketing, and how did you get to today?
Yeah, so I literally fell into it. So I hit my third year of uni and figured I needed to get some experience in an internship. And I was lucky enough to land at Salesforce, which was extremely lucky. I did an internship for nearly 18 months to 2 years while I finished my degree and then started full time. And so from there, I really, as I said, fell into the advocacy space, but also fell in love with the advocacy space. So for anyone who's not across what advocacy is and what they do, it's all about sharing customer stories and really getting a chance to meet and know your advocates. And for me, I'm an extrovert, so getting to talk to anyone is the best highlight of my day. I love it. I genuinely love people.
So Mel, one of the things that I've experienced as a salesperson thinking about customer references or how I use that, like there's kind of two pieces, a two-part question I'll ask you, right?
Yeah.
One is I've used, would you be a reference as a sales tool to get a deal signed, right? So a customer wants a better deal. So, hey, look, I'll do that as long as you become a reference. Great. So we've set up that expectation early on. And I think everybody should do that when you're selling anything, right? Whether you want some free wontons at the local restaurant, hey, make sure you tell some people that we're a great restaurant.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Or on the other side of that equation, it's, hey, I've got a customer partway through a sales cycle, and now I think I need to use customer references or that advocacy story to get the deal closed. And my experience has always been as a sales leader that most salespeople don't know how to use a reference well. They don't know when to bring it into a sales cycle. They don't know the right time for or how to introduce the reference. So many of them will just stick it up as a logo slide. Here's my logo. It's like, price is right,
Yeah.
And I think all of those just fall flat so often. As a marketer, what's your experience of that?
Oh, of presenting the story?
Yeah.
It's an interesting one because I've worked on really big, I could say visual pieces, which have landed really well. But I think in the context you're talking about, and if we're thinking about how does a salesperson share that story? So and we're thinking about that funnel as well. So we find customer stories work best at the top of funnel. So really about brand awareness. How do you actually rope a customer in from the get-go, get their attention? And we see that a lot with, is bashos a common term? I feel like it's a common term. So, okay, great.
Yep.
I'm in marketing. So, when you look at things like bashos, I know that there was a lot of work done to try and include references in those to try and capture that attention. Hey, your peer is using X product, or hey, they've seen this result. Usually we know numbers work best. So if we have some sort of metric that we can tie to that advocate, that is always the strongest possible story. And then I think as well, we know that in the final decision-making process, that's where references play an even bigger part. So as you were kind of mentioning, it's that sort of middle to bottom of the funnel. If I think about some of the stats behind it, because I love a good stat to drive things home, as I just said, metrics are key. I think it's 70+% of all buyers will reference something like 3 different advocate pieces before they actually make a decision. Okay. So whether that's a case study or a film, or potentially it's some press. So that's a really big number. And I think it also drives home why it's so important to have advocacy. Now, I think the second part of your question is also, and also please correct me if I'm wrong. Second part of your question is around that storytelling element. How do you actually get and have the sales team telling those stories in an effective way? From my experience, it's really about how can you create those memorable one-liners, really. Like, I don't think it needs to be too in-depth unless the person you're selling to requests that and wants more detail, and maybe it gets to that peer-to-peer reference stage, so you actually set them up with that customer and have a call. But I do think a really strong one-liner with a metric can go a really long way. That's just, I guess, delivered authentically in conversation. So if you're having that conversation, you go, hey, you could implement this product, but we've seen XYZ, like we saw this customer do it, this is how they did it, we could do the same for you. I think that's a really strong message to drive home. And really, I don't think it matters what part of the funnel you use that at. You can always, if you learn 1, 2, 3 references that are relevant to your patch or relevant to a set of customers that you look after, and you can use them interchangeably, I think that would probably be the strongest way. And I don't know if you agree with that, because you have the years of selling experience, but that would be my take. Yeah,
I think, Simon, this is an interesting topic, right? How do we use it? Like, my experience of great use of any previous customer story isn't necessarily the stats. Because I can't always translate, because one company had 15% growth or saved 4 head count or something, that you're going to have that. Like, if I make that promise, like, it's really hard for me to know that you can do that as well. But what I've always used the customer story for is someone else that has a similar problem in a space to you, approaches a problem in a market or sells a product in the same area as you. Like, they're encountering these issues. This is how they went and solved it. Let's go and do the work to understand, if we helped you in a similar way, would you get benefits from it that are worthwhile investing in? And that maybe that's a bit of my style, rather than something that people do en masse, because the numbers always, like, I just couldn't back the numbers up. What do you think about that, Simon?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I actually think it depends on who you're talking to. So I think, as we all work through a sales cycle, we have a buying center and we have a number of influencers, we have a champion, and then you've got the ultimate decision maker. And depending on what you're selling, it might be the CFO, the CIO, etc. Now, it's actually okay to present numbers to a CFO, but you do it in such a way that this customer achieved this, and here's what I learned out of how they got that achievement. Not that you're going to get the same number, but CFOs love numbers. But I also think if you're selling a product that has, let's say, an implementation like a CRM or an ERP, I think it's critically important, the use case and the user story about how they deployed it, what they did, et cetera. And I think if you talk to whoever's going to be the application owner or the project manager, you get the influencers talking about how they're going to deploy your solution, and then that bubbles up to the decision maker. So you've got a lot of different people in your buying center and different kinds of use user stories or references, etc., really affect different people. So I think know your audience, know who the buying center is, and different people in that buying center are going to react slightly different to different types of references and use cases. And I think you've also got to be really careful. A lot of salespeople I know use the same reference over and over and over again, and they assume that the reference is for the company. The reference is actually for the person that's listening. And I think what you're trying to do is change their mind or give them the confidence that making a decision to buy from you is actually a safe one. And so it's also about risk mitigation as well. So I think you just got to be a bit careful. And I think the other piece is, as a salesperson, try to use different companies as references. Don't use the same one because, Mel, I'm sure you know from your perspective, reference fatigue is a real issue, right? And if you've got in our market, Telstra is always the vanguard of companies that I've sold to, and poor old Telstra gets referenced every single time. And if I'm the poor person that's sitting in at Telstra and I get a call 5 times a week from the same seller about referencing, I'm just going to lose interest. And you actually burn that as a great reference site.
I would really agree with that as well. And I think a lot of what we do, at least from a marketing perspective, is about creating those assets. So what I would also say is, on that note of sort of reference burnout, is to see what you can use asset-wise to actually share that story with whoever you're selling to. So whether that's a slide, whether that's a film, whether it's a web story, because in the long run, and I'm talking selfishly here, that really helps our maybe less selfishly, for our advocates, selfishly, it helps our advocates actually not get burnt out and be able to, focus on their day-to-day jobs, right? Like they're doing us, we provide them with that opportunity to become an advocate. And I think at the end of the day, it's amazing that they do that, but we also don't want to take advantage of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Mel, I want to ask you about, I suppose, the other side of this equation. So we're looking at it just through the salesperson's lens, right? How do I use this tool being a customer advocate? Like, tell me, if I'm a customer and someone comes to me either from the marketing team or sales team or support or whoever and says, hey, we'd love you to be a customer advocate. Like, what does it entail?
Yeah, so it really depends on which organization is asking you, depends on how big or how small that opportunity might be. And I always do say it's an opportunity because as an advocate, I would look at it as a way of, what can I get out of this? So some of the benefits that, tout's the wrong word, but some of the benefits I would talk to if I was talking with a potential advocate is really, the first question to the customer is actually, hey, what do you think you might get out of this? These are some of the things we see. And it can be anything from, hey, you want to build your reputation in market. You want more experience speaking up on stage. Do you want to connect with peers? Does your organization maybe need more skills for that particular product? And so it's attracting people to come join your organization because they know you've got a great setup and it's being held up in lights by that customer. Is it the organization wants to be seen as more innovative in that particular space or have more of a thought leadership platform? So we've seen a number, and at least I've seen a number of different reasons why advocates join the program, why they want to join the program. I would say the most common is really around building up that reputation and having that thought leadership aspect, as well as, I would say, being highlighted as an innovator. But I've seen a range of them throughout my time. So definitely, I think there's a lot of reasons that people get involved. And I think also some of them are highly personal as well.
Well, I'll share my story because I don't know if you're aware, but I wouldn't have a career in tech if it wasn't for customer I can't even say it, advocacy, right? My part of my journey started, I was a Salesforce customer, and it wasn't that I was a Salesforce customer, just I was using a tech platform.
Yep.
And I was asked by my account exec at the time, would I be interested in doing a customer video? And if you may know, Andrew Everingham has been on the podcast. He had me down at one of the early Salesforce floors, did a video. I was then one of the guys that ended up out of the video being stuck on the poster at what was then CloudForce, which is a precursor to World Tour.
Yes.
And out of the back of that, obviously made a whole bunch of connections with a bunch of people internally at Salesforce. And it was never my dream to be running that company long term. And I got some advice that said, well, when you sell the business, make sure you have fired yourself and you don't work there anymore. Otherwise you'll go with it. And ended up, hitting some people up for a job at Salesforce. But at the time internally, in our business, when I was off doing a bunch of different speaking events and videos, etc., my sister who was working with us said, "Look, are we getting paid for this? Like your time is valuable in the business." And I said, "Listen, I don't know how we'll get paid, but we'll earn, this will be valuable to us." And I think that's one of the things that's always resonated for me, is that whether it's in your individual career, whether it's brand exposure, whether it's connection to other customers or leaders, like the time you spend being a customer advocate of a partner of yours or a supplier or a customer, that it pays back in spades.
Yeah.
It always pays back. And it's hard to tell ahead of time what that payback will be. You may end up working there. You may end up working for their competitor. Who knows? But it will always pay back for you and for your organization in terms of a positive outcome. So, I mean, that's one of the pieces as a person who's done it and built, literally, it's been one of the launch pads of my career. I can't recommend client reference programs. I can't even I can't recommend them highly enough.
Totally. And I would add to that as well, I've seen a multitude of customers get promoted through the work they've done because they've also been able to share it at their own organizations. Like, hey, check out this organization. They're putting me up in lights. It's showcasing all of this great work myself and the team have done. And then they get promoted. And it's a really awesome thing to see, especially because if you get lucky, your advocate will work with you for many years. And that's really the dream state. And I've been lucky enough to have customers who have. But to see them be able to grow in their career at the same time that they're working with you, it's absolutely priceless.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, Mel, what's interesting is you've obviously had a long, great career with Salesforce. You've recently moved to a new organization. Different companies are different and they do things differently. But is the root of what you're trying to achieve now that you're at Veeam versus what you're at Salesforce, is it fairly similar or is it radically different? Or what are you noticing as you've gone from, I guess, the CRM space to the data protection space? Is advocacy a similar thing or is it very, very different?
It's an interesting one. I actually think it's at the root of it all. It's the same. You've got this, I think, especially being at two really great companies, they've both got their communities which absolutely love the product. And I think that's really powerful in itself. But I would say from an advocacy perspective so far, bearing in mind I am quite new, it's pretty much on the same page. So definitely. I think at its root, it's about getting those customers to be excited about your product, to share that excitement and to share it as far as we can share it.
I think it's one of those pieces that given I'm now playing in a completely different space and I'm not in, I'm in a customer of everyone's technology solutions now as a fintech. Customer references and advocacy is a big part of our market as well. Mm-hmm. But the bit that I see that businesses who do it really well, they actually understand it's about trust. And it's really hard for someone to build trust one-on-one. Normally, trust is built by sort of weight of numbers. Mm-hmm. And whether, you can spend a whole heap of time building a brand, but brand building in the B2B space is hard. Yeah. Because you're not targeting, knowing that everyone, you're not trying to be a household name. I don't even believe Benioff thought when he started Salesforce he'd have buildings in harbors with names on it. That wasn't on the horizon. And most companies, when you start, it's not part of your marketing spend to put your name on the tip of everyone's tongue. So then when it hits, an approval board or a buyer signature, that who's this company? What am I buying from? Where are they real? Whereas what they're looking for is, who are people that look like me that have already made this decision, have had trusted outcomes? I can see that their journey is similar to mine. There's some people to lean on. I think all of that becomes critical and crucial in the space. And when you get it and you understand it well, it becomes a launch pad for, a much bigger customer growth. In saying that, I was intrigued to ask some questions, and I think we've all got some pieces on this. What are some horror stories? What are some stories where we've seen people use references really poorly or burn out good references? Maybe we keep people's names out of it, but I'm sure we've got some stories we can share when you just think, what were you doing? Don't do it this way.
I think based on those giggles, I think we're going to have a few.
You just got to remember, I'm quite I used to send the PR and comms team, so I'm very
Let's tell some stories. Let's name and shame. No, we shouldn't name and shame. But let's get some. Don't do this.
Ooh. I'm going to need a moment to think about this, if that's okay.
I've got the ones that I see all the time is from a sales perspective, an account executive or a leader, often it's a senior person who doesn't know when to bring the reference in. Oh, we'll just get them to talk to Jimmy. Jimmy's going to tell them just to buy it. And as a salesperson, you're thinking, stop, exit, stage left. Like, no, we haven't even validated the fact that they actually have a problem or a need or any budget for the thing that we're trying to solve. And you're trying to jam someone's, oh, we've got to get the deal in this month or this quarter. And if they just talk to Bob will tell them to buy. And you're like, stop. Like, they're the ones for me in terms of like those, but I've got his mobile number. I'll just get him to have exit, like, stop. They're the ones for me, I think, as a salesperson. It's understanding when to use it. And I've seen people use it so poorly. I mean, Simon, what about you, mate? What do you reckon from some horror stories?
I've seen some great ones. I think, look, first and foremost, when you're presenting a success story, don't overcook the presentation of it. Share it with them. Don't stand up and throw it at them. So one of my horror stories, I did have a boss once who we were at a client, and this person wanted to come to the meeting. I wasn't sure it was appropriate, but they were my boss, so I said yes. And that this person, actually, I'm in a tiny little room of about 4 of us, and they stand up and present the use case. And it had been drilled into everybody in this organization that there was a certain flow to the way you deliver the use case and the flow to the story. And, software companies love their customer stories, but he presented it at them, and it was awful. And the problem was, it was, I think that this person was trying to establish their own credibility. They were trying to stand up and present, but it went down like a lead balloon. So I think when you deliver a user story, if you do it at somebody, it's threatening, and they're going, well, this is all made up. I don't believe an ounce of this. You want to do it gently and lead them into the story and engage them in the story, and make sure that they empathize with the problem that the other customer has solved. Because if there's no linkage between the problems, they're just going, well, this is a useless waste of my life. So link it to them. Use their buzzwords as you're delivering and finessing the story. And I think that's a key one.
Yeah. What I just heard you say then, if I put another lens on that problem, is just because a company that looks like you or a reference story solved a problem doesn't mean that this is relevant for me, or that I can use it that way, or that it will solve my problem. That's not a reason why I'm going to buy. I'm going to buy because I'm clear on what my problem is, and I agree that that's my problem, and I agree that your product, service, or partnership will help me resolve whatever it is we've just established. Just because somebody else had that you think kind of looks like me, they might be my direct competitor, but they haven't got the same problem as me. Or I've got more money or less money. My people have got, up or down maturity. Like, they're not the same. And so just berating me because competitor X did this, therefore you should, why haven't you signed already? That doesn't work.
No.
Yeah. And advocacy should just be complementary in the decision-making process. So you're using it to help build trust. Hey, we've done this well, but actually we're here to focus in on you and what your problem is.
Yep. And it's especially a tricky one in public sector, right? Because finding government agencies or departments that are willing to be a active participant, there's a lot of fear in there. Mel, have you successfully got government departments to be advocates before?
Yeah, a couple. And I think it's, again, like, we keep coming back to trust, and it is really all about making sure that advocate and that particular, whether it's a state or federal government individual, actually feels comfortable, and their marketing team feels comfortable as well. So I think for government in particular, it's really important to lay out what exactly that opportunity is, whether it's a case study or speaking opportunity, and just being really clear on what the objectives are. So generally, we've seen a bit of success with it, and it's actually been quite a lot easier, I think, than maybe what people think. But it is very, as you can imagine, there's some parts of the government that are more happy to share than others, just based on what their focus is.
Yeah, 100%.
What's the best medium, particularly for government? Is it video? Is it written? Is it just having them as a listed entity that they can talk to someone? What would you recommend in that space in particular?
So when you say best, do you mean easiest to work with
Well, hey,
or easiest to onboard?
I don't know. Like,
Or,
give me the different categories, I suppose. Like,
yeah, so because I would say you tell me what's going to work best for your sales cycle. But I think typically what I've seen is speaking is a lot easier to engage government customers in particular for. So I think that's because there's a bit more control over what that talk track will be. You've often got that Q&A already decided, and so they've got those talking points that mean that everything is quite structured. And so I think that's quite easy. The other one that's super easy is actually super easy. I say that. That's terrible phrasing. The other one that we see a lot of government customers actually open to is case studies, because again, it's that medium of control. So they get to review that asset, they get to approve that asset, and nothing goes live without their approval. So again, I keep saying it, but it's about that trust aspect of just they're putting their brand in your hands, and you just got to make sure that you're being really safe with it.
one question I've got around how you kind of approach this, because I've seen lots of leaders inside businesses get cautious around being involved in these programs. Oh, I'm not quite sure that we're ready yet in order to put our name behind selling your product. And my kind of viewpoint on that has always been, and like to me, if this is how you think about it as well and how you approach it as a marketer, it's never about selling my product. It's just about, you've already bought my stuff. We're already engaged, but it's about selling your story that you had a problem that we solved. And yes, sure, I'm possibly going to get some benefits out of this in terms of that sort of sideline story, but this is about showing the innovation or the growth that you're taking as an organization and actually promoting your brand. And I kind of get some sideline conversation there. Is that how you think about it? Or is it the opposite ways? Is it really all about my brand?
As an advocate?
Yeah, like who gets the most benefit out of it?
It's very 50-50 depending on who you're working with. So I think it also depends as well. So a lot of tech companies have their communities as well. So I think that's also something to consider as part of I would call it the extended advocacy realm, is those communities. So really depending on your individual will depend on whether it's the organization or the person. I mean, I mentioned before, I'd seen a couple of the customers I've worked with get promoted. So that's obviously the individual because they're able to share that work. But I think also it depends on the size of the customer. So if you're a small business, for instance, that maybe has a smaller marketing budget than, say, a huge enterprise, the advocacy program actually allows for free marketing, right? Across oftentimes a larger organizations, social channels or audiences and things like that. And so I think it's really a case-by-case basis. And that's kind of what I was saying before in terms of different benefits will affect different customers in a different way, just depending on where they are, I guess, in their size of business, their industries, what products they're using. But yeah, I think that's really, you do see some really cool, I guess, things come out of it, but it's very 50-50, very 50-50. And I know that's a really like non-specific answer, but it's the reality. Yeah.
That's great. That's good. There's benefit in it for a lot of people. That's interesting. So look, I think if I take it another step, obviously we're talking to a lot of Australians in this audience, and we're obviously, we use case studies and references all over Asia, America, etc. One couple of questions for you. I guess first one is, in Australia, I've sold ERP software, CRM software, other software, but let's take ERP for a minute. The decision maker, typically the CFO, is involved. One of the things I've noticed predominantly in Australia is a lot of the reference activity happens without the vendor involved. So let's say I'm selling to company A, that CFO is looking at it, he's been through your demos, he's excited, etc. He or she will typically pick up the phone and talk to their network. They won't come to the salesperson, they won't ask marketing for a reference, etc. And that tends to happen in smaller markets. I assume it happens elsewhere, but it's probably heightened here. I'm interested, Mel, Do you ever have that in the back of your mind as you're building these customer advocates? Do you ever ask them, do you get calls that are completely under the radar, et cetera? Do you have a problem with that as a marketer? I'm keen on how you think about that.
Well, I have one answer for it, but I don't know if it's... I think you'd only have a problem with it as a marketer if there was a more negative connotation with your product, because you have less control over what is that word of mouth being shared, right? So if you're helping to organize that peer-to-peer reference, you're never going to give someone who's negative, or maybe they're prone to saying things that maybe aren't the most positive. And so I think from that perspective, your main concern would be there is if your product doesn't back up what you say it does. Mm-hmm. I think if you have a strong product where generally you have a fairly happy community, most of your users, you've got high NPS scores, all of that jazz, I would actually encourage it. I mean, word of mouth, whether it's in tech or whether it's, what's the newest restaurant down the street that, you check in with your mate, is it good? Mm-hmm. It's going to happen regardless. So I think it really comes back to... Yeah, exactly. Like, embrace it. And if you need to, how do you make those people who are using your product even happier, so that if your CFO is calling up his other CFO mates, you want them to say positive things. So how do you get them to say positive things?
I want to share this story with yourself as a marketer, but also my experience as a salesperson, right? And I think I know the story Simon wants me to tell here, but one of the most important lessons that I learned is actually don't be scared of the negative reference. I think we all hunt down and we get cautious about, that customer deployment is not perfect yet. So when you give a customer reference right at the beginning, like you just signed the contract yesterday and you're still in pre-deployment, the customer reference isn't then about it's a successful deployment. It's about, hey, we went through this process. We picked these guys because of these things. It's gone poorly or well, or this is our experience so far. So if you jump in, be aware of those things. That's the first piece. But I learned this lesson. Great guy called Tony. If he listens, awesome. I won't give his surname out to name and shame him. But the lesson he taught me was, he thought, and for all those listening, apologies, and this is what he thought, all of our references were BS until he got the one reference that said, hey, be careful of these things.
Okay.
And his message there was, because of course, you guys are salespeople, everything's rosy, everything works. And he says, particularly when you're buying enterprise solutions or B2B solutions, your example of a restaurant, sometimes you burn the steak. Like sometimes it goes
very true.
And we know that my issue isn't the fact you burnt the steak. It's what do you do next?
Yeah.
And how did they react to when it went wrong? Because until I can find that time when, hey, in the deployment, something's going to go wrong. Of course it is. Like, think about your own experience. Moving house. The removals will tell you it's amazing until you're midway through packing the boxes at 3 a.m. and going, what am I doing this for? Right? And the box breaks and your grandma's fast. Like it's going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. How do you solve it next? And how does the organization react? To me, that was the most important lesson that I learned about references. It's not just about the rosy reference. It's about the negatives as well. And then I suppose even if you think about like Google reviews, or like the best reviews are not where you get there and you go, they're all 5 stars. And you go, yeah, but rubbish. Tell me, like, I'll always click in the one that says 1 star. Mm-hmm. What was it? Your particular delivery went missing. Hold on. They've got 10 million deliveries. That's going to happen. Okay. There's 5 people that said it went missing. 5 out of 10 million. I'll play those odds, right? Like, I think that's the piece that we as salespeople get concerned about. And at the end of the day, if you're not willing to stand by the times that someone gives feedback about you when you're not in the room, there's probably something else you got to look at in your business, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, what's really interesting is, I've had, and look, ERP implementations are, and maybe CRM as well, are notorious. You're quite right, Dan. That is absolutely spot on. They're never 100% perfect. I think what's really interesting is when I'm talking to a CFO and they've agreed to be a reference for me for another CFO, one of the things I say to them every single time is, yes, tell them how great my product is, tell them, the rosy stuff, but can you please keep it real? And the last thing and you say negative, negative comments. I sort of flip that a little bit. Keep the commentary real. So what really happened? What lessons would you do differently? Because we all know very rarely is deployment about the capability of the software. It's the people behind the keyboard that don't get it right, whether that's the vendor, the partner, the customer. All of these people are trying to do the right thing. Things do go wrong. And quite often you have a project manager or a CFO or a CIO that can give a pearl of wisdom to a potential prospect to say, hey, this is kind of where I went off the rails. I wouldn't do it that way again.
Yeah.
But the net at the end is it's good software, but it probably took us too long. Don't do that. And that is, in my view, the perfect reference.
Yep.
I totally agree with that as well. Yeah.
I think it works whether it's software, services, anything. Like there's always two parties, and how do you get the best outcome from that experience, that investment of time and effort, etc. Like that's what's in a reference.
Yep.
Agreed. Even just having those customers that can talk about how they potentially turn something around. I mean, you were saying it there before. It's how did you get through that issue? And as you said, it's about having that authentic voice. And I mean, I was watching a few of your other podcasts and I realized that came through a lot, right? That's a theme, especially if you yourselves as sellers, right? A big part of selling is being authentic in that. It's being generally curious, which I also heard was another word that was used a lot. And I think it applies here as well. And so making sure those references are authentic. They're not always, we know they're not going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's just not practical. It's not life. That's not how things go. And so I think as real as you can make that story, and I say positive, not as in sunshine and rainbows. I say positive as in, hey, we've worked through XYZ problem. And I think it's also understanding the best forums to tell those really truthful and authentic stories as well. So there's going to be some assets you'll see us create, which are very much focused on the positive. And then there may be things like roundtables or even speaking opportunities where you have that chance to delve into a bit more detail and really delve into what was the why, like what actually happened in this case and how did you solve for it. So it's also thinking about what are the different ways you can show that customer story and how can you show that authenticity through those different assets.
Yep, spot on.
So I've got an advocacy story I want to get from you, Mel. So as someone who stepped out of university straight into the tech world and landed in probably la la land of type of companies being Salesforce, what reference would you give to people looking at that similar journey around, hey, I want to get into sales or marketing? And tech's an exciting space. Look, it's been an interesting couple of years in tech, right? It's definitely changed as to what it was sort of 5 or 6 years ago or longer for Simon and I. Like what's the reference you'd give about people, not necessarily joining Salesforce, but like stepping into the tech world? Like what reference would you give them?
Oh, okay. For me, I think it was the right move. So that would be my overall reference. I think the privilege I've had is I've had the chance to mentor a lot of juniors and, work with incoming interns as well. And the one thing I always say to them is the great thing about the tech space is it's so fast moving. Things are always changing. There's always the next revolution, whatever that's going to be. And so it's really exciting. I think there's also a lot of different areas you can get into that you just don't know exist. You're going through university and you might do a marketing course, or you do a business admin course, or you do a business writing course, whatever those courses look like. But no one actually delves into, hey, here are the different job types, because it's just obviously it can't get that specific. And so I think the one thing I do share is like, hey, there's so much opportunity. If you're creative, if you're more operationally minded, if you're more into the numbers, if you want to be customer facing, if you absolutely don't want to be customer facing, I think for me, the tech world kind of offers all of that. And I think the interesting thing, and I will add as a female, is it's not something I actually thought I'd end up in. It wasn't anywhere I thought I'd be heading. And literally it's just because I don't feel like it was aimed at me, at least in my lifetime while I was going through school. So I think it was a really cool space to end up in, and I couldn't be more grateful. But hopefully that's a great review.
Well, look, I think that kind of covers off, that we always ask people some bit of advice at the end of the podcast, and I think that's some phenomenal advice. I mean, one thing I think part of that piece of, I do feel sorry though for people like yourself who stepped into their first role in some of these big American tech firms. The rest of the business world doesn't always look like that.
I was reminded of that a lot by all of my colleagues around me. So it was definitely a very, I'd have to say, I was like, well, there's free snacks every day. It's great. Yeah.
Until you've worked in a place where basically what you get is instant coffee and a couple of biscuits in a packet on the side. That's when you're really building from the ground up. I'm not saying that's where I'm in now, but that when you've had that experience, you kind of get both sides of the equation.
Definitely. So before we finish up, there's just one last thing I'd love to do. Just as an advocacy marketer, I feel like I'd be doing the advocacy marketers wrong if I didn't add this. So really, between advocacy and sales, it's really a symbiotic relationship. So sales help us to get those references. We leverage your trusted relationships to build our own trusted relationships to then build those references, which then you use. So I would just say to all the salespeople out there, if your advocacy marketer is reaching out to you or trying to work with you to get a customer on board, give them the time of day. Help us get them on board. Yes. It's all about, we're trying to help you, but help us to help you. So yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. Look, Mel, I can't reinforce that highly enough, right? So anyone who is in sales, whether you're a sales leader, you're a CEO, if you're not having that conversation with your customers on almost a daily basis when you meet them, you're actually doing yourself disservice. I mean, every time you build an advocate, it's about investment in the next month, quarter, year. It's investment back in that customer. If you want to have in software in particular, we all talk about retention rates. You want to retain a customer, make them an advocate. You want to grow an industry sector, find 5 advocates. If you want to grow your territory, don't wait for someone to bring you an advocate. Go and build 5 yourself. Like if you've got that built into your organization and your sales motion, you'll already be halfway through next year's number. It's so important, mate, for sure. Well, in saying that, Mel, thank you so much for joining. Simon, I forgot to ask at the top of the podcast how your week's been, but I know I've had a couple of phone calls about stuff you've been doing, mate. So I know you've been busy traveling around. So thanks for coming on again. For everybody, thank you so much for joining GrowthPulse, the B2B Sales Podcast. Do us a huge favor. If you can click like and subscribe down below. You're listening to us on either Apple or Spotify. Press the plus button so you'll know when we have the next episode coming up. We've got some very cool guests coming up shortly, so do make sure you subscribe and get notification of those. Mel, thanks so much. Simon, thanks.
Mel.
Thank you.